I used to imagine what it would feel like to return home as someone different. Not as the awkward, quiet girl everyone dismissed, but as a woman who built something, who mattered. But I never imagined I'd return in a helicopter. The rotors sliced through the crisp morning air, sending ripples of dust across the long gravel driveway of my family's estate, the same place I once ran barefoot as a child, where laughter used to echo before it turned into judgment. From above, the property looked smaller than I remembered. The grand house, with its white columns and perfectly trimmed hedges, once felt like the center of the world. Now it looked ordinary. The pilot turned to me and gave a slight nod. "We're clear to land, ma'am." That still felt strange. 4 years I'd been the disappointment, the lost one, the dreamer who never grew up. Now, even strangers spoke to me with a tone of respect my own family had never managed. As the helicopter descended, I could already see them. My father, my mother, and my siblings, standing outside on the terrace, their faces pale and unreadable. The sound of the blades must have drawn them out. They shielded their eyes from the wind, holding their clothes in place, their expressions frozen between confusion and disbelief. I stepped out slowly, my shoes sinking slightly into the gravel. The wind whipped my hair back, the air carrying the faint scent of engine oil and autumn leaves. My father was the first to recover from the shock. His jaw tightened. His once dark hair, now streaked with gray, fluttered slightly in the breeze. His voice, the same one that had once made me shrink as a child, called out, sharp, commanding. "Who is that?" For a moment I almost smiled. He didn't even recognize me. But then my mother gasped. "Oh my God, it's her." Her words fell like a pin in silence. My brother, Daniel, turned toward her. "What do you mean her?" "It's your sister," my mother whispered, her eyes wide. It's her." The words barely reached me through the roar of the slowing rotors. But the disbelief on their faces, that was enough. It had been 12 years since I'd last stepped foot on this property. 12 years since I was told I didn't belong at the family meeting. 12 years since I was labeled the failure. And now here I was, invited or not, landing in their backyard. The helicopter blades slowed, the thunder fading to a deep hum. I reached for my small leather bag, the same one I'd carried through airports and factories, filled with notes, contracts, and sketches of engines and blueprints. The bag that had seen every sleepless night, every flight, every breakthrough. I looked down at it and smiled faintly. We made it, I thought. When I turned back, my father had already stepped forward. His voice low and filled with tension. "What are you doing here?" I could have answered in a dozen ways. I could have told him I was there to buy his company. I could have told him I owned 3 aircraft hangars across the state, that my startup had become a global supplier for emergency rescue drones. But instead I said the simplest truth. I heard there was a family meeting. The look on his face, part fury, part disbelief, almost made me laugh. Almost. Daniel folded his arms. "You weren't invited." "I know," I said softly, my voice steady. "But since when did that ever stop me from showing up?" A flicker of something crossed my mother's face. Guilt, maybe. But she stayed silent, clutching her scarf as the last gust of rotor wind brushed past her. Behind them, I could see my sister, Ellen, standing near the door, holding a glass of wine though it was barely noon. She tilted her head, studying me like I was a stranger. "Wow," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "You finally made something of yourself. I almost didn't recognize you." Her words stung less than they used to. Years ago, a comment like that would have broken me. Now, it only reminded me how small they still were. I took a step closer. "Yes," I said quietly. "I made something." For a brief second no one spoke. The silence was thick, uneasy. Only the soft whine of the helicopter cooling down filled the air. And then, that moment, that quiet shift I'll never forget. My father's gaze dropped from my face to the helicopter behind me. His eyes lingered on the logo printed neatly near the door. Aurea Aerospace. I saw the recognition dawn on him slowly, like a curtain being pulled back. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. 'Cause he knew that name. Everyone in business circles did. It was the company that had just signed a multi-million-dollar defense contract, the one featured in aviation magazines, the one he'd once mocked in a boardroom as some foolish startup run by amateurs. And now, standing before him, was the amateur who owned it. His face went pale. That's your company." I didn't answer. I just smiled faintly and said, "I think we have a lot to talk about." He took a step back like the ground beneath him had shifted. My siblings exchanged confused glances. My mother whispered something I couldn't hear. And in that strange, heavy silence, I felt it. The years of shame, struggle, and loneliness collapsing into one breathtaking moment of quiet power. For so long I had dreamed of proving myself. But now that I was here, standing before them with everything I'd built, I realized something profound. I didn't need to prove anything. I wasn't here for revenge. I wasn't here for validation. I was here to close a circle that had been left open too long. "Let's go inside," I said gently. "I think we have business to discuss." No one moved. My father's pride held him still. His lips pressed into a tight line. But my mother finally stepped aside. "Come in," she murmured almost to herself. I walked past them slowly, the gravel crunching under my heels, each step echoing with a memory of the night I'd walked away 12 years ago, when my father had said, "You'll come crawling back someday." I didn't crawl. Flew. And as I crossed that threshold again, I thought to myself, let's see who really failed. I used to think failure had a sound. A particular way silence echoes after someone says, "I'm disappointed in you." For me, it was the slam of my father's office door, followed by the faint hum of the old clock ticking on the hallway wall. That sound meant another dream of mine had died before it could even breathe. When I was 16, I told my parents I wanted to build something that could fly. My father laughed so hard he spilled his coffee. "Sweetheart," he said between chuckles, "you can't even balance your checkbook, and you're talking about aircraft? Stick to something sensible. You're not cut out for the real world." That sentence lodged itself deep inside me. I remember walking back to my room, pretending not to care. But that night, I lay awake staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling, whispering to myself, one day I'll show him. But showing him wasn't easy. He ran a logistics company. Big, loud, and ruthless. My brother Daniel was already his golden heir, working in the office by the time he turned 20. My sister Ellen was the polished gem, always perfect, always praised. And me. I was the creative one, which in our family was a polite word for failure waiting to happen. When I tried to talk about my ideas, drones that could deliver medical aid, small aircraft that could run on solar energy, my mother just smiled that condescending smile she reserved for unrealistic dreams. "Sweetheart," she'd say softly, "you're idealistic. That's not a bad thing. But it's not profitable." Every dinner turned into a quiet reminder that I didn't belong in their world. While my siblings talked about business and market shares, I sat silently, drawing sketches on napkins. Once Daniel caught me doing it. He smirked. "You know what Dad says. You're like one of those paper planes. Looks cute but never gets far." They laughed. Even my mother. And I smiled too because I didn't want them to see me break. After college, things got worse. I turned down a comfortable position at my father's company because I wanted to work for an aerospace startup. He called it throwing my future away. He said, "Don't come crying when it all collapses." And it did collapse. The company folded within a year. I was left with nothing. A tiny apartment, a pile of unpaid bills, and the echo of his voice saying, "I told you so." For months, I avoided everyone. I took on odd jobs, waitressing, tutoring, even assembling parts at a mechanic shop. I remember the smell of oil that stuck to my clothes, the ache in my hands, and the way my coworkers laughed when I told them I once wanted to build aircraft. You're in the wrong hangar, girl," one said. "You should be filing papers, not tightening bolts." Maybe he was right. But one night, while cleaning up after a long shift, I found an old box in the storage room. filled with broken drone parts. I couldn't resist. I stayed after hours tinkering, fixing, experimenting. It didn't fly, not at first. But that failure, it didn't sting like my father's laughter did. Felt alive, like I was finally doing what I was meant to do. That's when I started again. I found a cheap warehouse space outside town. The roof leaked, the walls were cracked, but it was mine. I slept there sometimes, using old blueprints as blankets, chasing a dream no one believed in but me. I taught myself circuitry, programming, mechanics, through books, through mistakes, through tears. Every failure became a blueprint for something better. And then my first success. A drone that actually lifted, hovered, and carried a small payload. I remember crying when it finally stayed airborne for more than 30 seconds. Not because of the achievement, but because it was the first time something I made refused to fall apart. That small success grew into something bigger. A local hospital saw my prototype and asked if I could adapt it to deliver medicine to rural areas during floods. I said yes, though I had no idea how I'd pull it off. I slept 3 hours a night, sometimes less. Borrowed tools. I maxed out credit cards. I lived on ramen noodles and faith. But it worked. The drone delivered insulin to a stranded family in the middle of a storm. That story hit the local news. Then investors called. The name Aurea Aerospace was born, from the Latin word aurea, meaning golden. I wanted it to stand for hope, for resilience. But I didn't tell my family. Not yet. Because in their eyes, I was still the one who failed. The real blow came 2 years later. My father invited everyone for a family meeting at the estate. When I arrived, Daniel met me at the gate. He was dressed sharply, smiling that smug smile I remembered too well. "Hey sis," he said. "Dad didn't mention you were coming." "I got the invite," I said. He shook his head. "There's been a change of plans. Just for partners and shareholders. You understand." My heart sank. "Daniel, I'm family." He sighed, pretending to look sorry. "Yeah, but family doesn't always mean business." And then he shut the gate in my face. Behind him, through the glass doors, I saw them all. My parents, my sister, their friends. Laughing, eating, talking about success. My own family. Celebrating a future I wasn't part of. That was the night I stopped waiting for their approval. I went home and wrote something on my wall. In black marker, bold letters. "You don't need their table when you can build your own." And I did. Years passed. My company grew from a warehouse dream to an international force. We developed drones for disaster relief. Then advanced prototypes for aviation safety. Governments called. Investors came. And soon, Aurea Aerospace became worth more than my father's entire empire. Funny how silence changes tone when success walks in. The same relatives who used to mock me started asking about collaborations. Ellen sent me holiday cards. Daniel emailed once, something vague about potential business alignment. I ignored them. But when I heard they were hosting another family meeting, when I saw the photos online, everyone gathered at the estate again, smiling, holding champagne. Something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not revenge. Just closure. I wanted to see their faces. To look into the eyes of the people who told me I'd never be enough. And stand there not needing their approval anymore. So I chartered the helicopter. And as I flew over the hills that morning, watching the estate grow larger beneath me, I thought of that 16-year-old girl, crying over broken drone parts, and whispered to her, "We did it." The blades of the helicopter sliced through the morning air, roaring like thunder over the calm countryside. Below me, I saw the sprawling estate, the same one I grew up in. The manicured lawns, the fountain that never seemed to stop sparkling, the stone driveway that I used to roller skate down when I was little. All of it looked smaller now. Funny how things shrink when you rise above them. The pilot glanced back and said, "We're landing right on schedule, ma'am." I nodded, my heart steady. Not racing, not trembling, just steady. Because this wasn't about proving myself anymore. This was about showing them who I became despite them. As we descended, I saw movement near the back patio. people stepping out, shielding their eyes from the downwash. Daniel was the first one I recognized. He looked irritated, yelling something to my father, pointing toward the sky. Then I saw my mother, frozen, hand covering her mouth. The helicopter touched down right in the middle of their pristine rose garden. The petals scattered into the air like confetti. And honestly, it was poetic. When the blade slowed and silence returned, I opened the door and stepped out. My heels hit the stone path with a sharp click, the same sound my father used to make pacing his office floor when he was angry. Now it was my rhythm. Daniel stormed toward me. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I took off my sunglasses and smiled. "Arriving." He blinked, as if the word itself offended him. "Do you have any idea what this is?" "This is a private family meeting." "Good thing I'm family," I said calmly. Before he could answer, my father appeared in the doorway. Even from a distance, I could see his expression, shock mixed with something else. Not anger this time. Not exactly pride either. Maybe disbelief. "Dad," I said softly, walking toward him. He didn't move. Everyone was watching. My sister Ellen, her husband, my mother, Daniel, a few business partners, even a couple of family friends. I could feel the tension prickling in the air like static. My mother finally found her voice. "What is this spectacle, for heaven's sake?" she demanded. "You just landed a helicopter in our garden." "I know," I said, looking around. "It's a lovely landing spot. I see you still keep the place perfect." Daniel scoffed. "Typical. You always did like showing off. Let me guess. You rented this thing for a dramatic entrance." Before I could respond, my father spoke. His voice low, measured. "That's not rented," he said. Everyone turned toward him. He looked at me, eyes narrowed. "I've seen that logo before," he continued. "Aurea Aerospace. You're the one behind that." I didn't answer right away. I wanted the silence to linger, to stretch, to make them feel it. Finally I nodded. "Yes, I founded it." The air went still. Daniel laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "You expect us to believe that? Come on." I turned to him and tilted my head. "You can check the public filings if you'd like. Or better yet, ask your company's logistics division. They've been using my drones for the last 6 months." He stopped laughing. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's lips parted slightly. She looked like she wanted to speak but didn't know how. Ellen finally whispered, "Wait, you own that Aurea? The one that signed the federal contracts?" I smiled faintly. "The same one." Silence again. Then Daniel muttered, "This is insane." I took a slow breath and looked at all of them. "I didn't come here to prove anything. I came here because I saw you all gathering again like old times, and I wanted to see my family. That's all." My father frowned. "You expect us to believe that? After years of ignoring us?" "I didn't ignore you," I said quietly. "You shut me out." He opened his mouth to argue, but I stepped closer. "You told me I'd never succeed without you. You made sure I felt like the weak link. And when I refused to work under you, you locked me out of this family's future. All because I didn't want to follow your path." His face hardened, but I could see the flicker of guilt behind his eyes. "Look around you," I said. "You built an empire that only survives because others obey. I built something that saves lives." Ellen crossed her arms. "Oh, please don't make this dramatic. You've always loved playing the victim." I turned to her, calm but firm. "You're right. I was a victim, until I stopped believing your version of me." The crowd was quiet again, their polished shoes scuffing against the stone as no one dared to speak. My father finally exhaled sharply. "So what now?" he said coldly. "You came here in your fancy helicopter just to lecture us?" "No," I said softly. "I came to return something." From my bag I pulled out a folder, thick with papers. I handed it to him. "What is this?" "Deed transfers," I said. "Remember the warehouse you sold years ago? The one I bought for my first project? That land's value skyrocketed when the new airport expanded. I'm donating it to the local university. For an aviation scholarship. He blinked. That's your decision. It's my legacy, I replied. Not a throne. Not an empire. Something that actually helps people. My mother's voice cracked. Why didn't you ever tell us? I looked at her, really looked at her. The perfect pearls around her neck. The polished expression that never seemed to change. Because you wouldn't have listened, I said. You would have found a way to turn it into a lecture about control. I didn't need your blessing. I just needed peace. Daniel stepped forward, bitterness curling in his tone. So this is your revenge, huh? Showing up rich, throwing it in our faces. No, I said. This isn't revenge. This is clarity. He sneered. Sounds like revenge to me. I smiled faintly. If you think peace looks like revenge, that says more about you than me. For a moment no one spoke. The wind rustled the rose bushes that had survived the helicopter's landing. The scent of crushed petals filled the air. My father finally looked at me, really looked, and his voice softened. You did it, he said quietly. You actually did it. He nodded. Yes, Dad. I did. He swallowed, eyes glistening slightly. I underestimated you. I smiled sadly. You didn't underestimate me, Dad. You just didn't see me. He nodded once, slowly, like he was realizing something too late. Behind him, Daniel still looked furious. Ellen looked uncomfortable, and my mother was dabbing her eyes with a napkin. I turned toward the helicopter. I should go. But before I left, I glanced back one more time. You know, I said softly, I used to dream of this moment, of finally proving myself to you. But now that it's here, I don't need it. I don't need any of you to know my worth. I already do. Then I smiled, just a small one. But it felt good landing here. As I climbed back into the helicopter, I could see them standing there, still frozen, still processing. And when we lifted off, I looked down at the estate one last time. The roof glimmered under the sunlight, the same way it always did, but it didn't look like home anymore. Because home wasn't the place where you were born. It was the place where you learned to rise after being told you'd never fly. The helicopter hummed softly as it rose higher into the pale afternoon sky. The house, the garden, the people who once shaped every inch of my self-worth. All of it grew smaller until it looked like a miniature model of the life I had outgrown. For a long time I just sat there, staring out the window, the rotor's rhythm fading into a quiet pulse that matched my heartbeat. The pilot's voice crackled through the headset. Heading back to the city, ma'am? He nodded. Yes. But take the long way. He smiled. You got it. As we flew over the hills, I thought about the last 20 years of my life. The messy parts, the lonely nights, the times I doubted every choice I ever made. I'd built something beautiful, something massive, and yet none of it had started with ambition. It had started with rejection. That night so many years ago, when my father told me I wasn't cut out for business, I'd cried myself to sleep on a couch in a one-room apartment. I still remember how the streetlights leaked through the curtains, painting gold lines on the ceiling. I swore to myself that night. I wouldn't chase approval anymore. I would build a life that didn't need to be validated. That vow had carried me through everything. When investors laughed at my pitch deck, I kept going. When my prototype drones failed mid-flight, I rebuilt them. When my first factory burned down, I started over. I had learned something my family never understood. That failure is not the opposite of success. It's the soil that grows it. We passed over the river, and for the first time that day I felt light. No more weight in my chest. No more hunger to prove. Just peace. When we landed at my headquarters, my assistant was already waiting by the helipad. She was young, bright-eyed, probably half my age, but full of the same fire I once had. She handed me a folder. They finalized the partnership with the environmental division, she said. It's official. You're the majority donor. Smiled. Good. That'll make the university expansion possible. Then I paused, looking at the city skyline beyond the glass towers. Can you do me a favor? Yes. Of course. Send the university the scholarship list. But also, add one more fund. She looked curious. For what purpose? I took a deep breath. A program for first-generation entrepreneurs. Kids who were told they'd never make it. Her smile widened. That sounds like something close to your heart. I nodded slowly. It is. That evening, I sat in my penthouse office. Walls of glass, city lights twinkling below. The kind of view I used to dream of when I was scraping by. But instead of pride, I felt something softer. Gratitude. I poured myself a cup of tea and looked through a box of old photographs. Ones I hadn't touched in years. Me and Daniel as kids, racing through the garden. My mother laughing as Dad grilled steaks. Ellen helping me pick out my prom dress. They weren't bad people. Just blind ones. Maybe I had been too once. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number popped up. Dad. I'd like to talk. Just you and me. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. My office. The next morning I arrived early. He came exactly on time. Punctual as always, wearing the same kind of gray suit he'd worn since I was a child. He looked older now. Not just in his face but in his posture, his eyes. The sharp authority that once defined him had dulled into something weary. Morning, I said gently. He nodded. Morning. We sat down across from each other. The silence thick but not hostile. He glanced around the office, his gaze lingering on the awards, the photos of my team, the model of the aircraft we'd just launched. This is impressive, he said finally. I didn't realize how far you'd come. I smiled faintly. That's because you stopped looking. He sighed. You're right. There was a pause. Then he leaned forward slightly. I want to apologize. For the way we treated you. I looked at him, really looked. It wasn't the arrogant tone of a man defending his ego this time. It was humility. Genuine, trembling humility. He continued, voice cracking a little. I thought I was protecting you. I thought, by keeping you close, by keeping you under control, you'd have security. But I see now, all I gave you was fear. The words hung between us. I didn't cry. I didn't interrupt. Just listened. He exhaled shakily. When you flew in yesterday, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Real pride. Not because of the helicopter. Not the company. But because you had the strength to walk away, and still come back with grace. I swallowed hard. You really mean that? He nodded. Yes, I was wrong. And I'm sorry. For a long moment I just sat there, my throat tight, my hands trembling slightly. Then I stood up and walked around the desk. He looked startled as I reached out and hugged him. It wasn't long, just a few seconds, but it was the kind of hug that says everything words can't. When I pulled back I said softly, "Thank you for saying that." He nodded, eyes glassy. You deserved to hear it. That afternoon as he left, he turned one last time at the door. You've built something extraordinary, he said. You made it on your own, but I hope you'll let us be part of your life again. I smiled gently. We'll see. And that was enough. A few days later, I stood on the stage at the university's aviation ceremony. Sunlight streaming through the glass dome above. Hundreds of students, faculty, and journalists filled the hall. I stepped up to the microphone and began to speak. When I was younger, I said, someone told me I'd never make it. That I didn't have the discipline, the drive, or the intelligence to build anything on my own. I looked out at the crowd. Young faces full of hope and nerves. I carried those words like a chain for years. But here's what I learned. People who underestimate you are only measuring your potential with the limits of their own imagination. A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Failure doesn't define you. Rejection doesn't define you. What defines you is the moment you decide to stop waiting for permission to become who you're meant to be. Applause filled the hall. I smiled, feeling something deep in my chest unlock. As I stepped down from the stage, my assistant whispered, "Your father's here." I turned, And there he was, sitting quietly in the back row. No suit jacket this time. Just a plain shirt, hands folded. He smiled at me. Smiled back. It wasn't a perfect ending. But it was a new beginning. That night I went home, to my real home. Not a mansion, not a boardroom, but a quiet house overlooking the water. As the sunset reflected off the waves, I sat on the porch, watching the sky turn gold and then crimson. My phone buzzed again, a message from Daniel this time. "Congrats, sis. I didn't say it before, but you were right. I'm proud of you." I smiled, typing back. "Thanks, Danny. It's never too late to start fresh." Then I put the phone down and looked up at the stars. There was peace now. Not the kind that comes from proving anyone wrong, but the kind that comes from knowing you finally made peace with yourself. Because in the end, I didn't just rise above them. I rose beyond them.